Hi everyone. Welcome to our online engagement event for the Neighbourhood Bikeways Project. Tonight we will be focusing on the 14th Street corridor. My name is Carly Grassing and I'm the project manager with the City of Saskatoon responsible for the Neighbourhood Bikeways Project. Tonight I'm joined by Danae Balogan, the Active Transportation Program Manager with the City.
Hi everyone.
Natalie Baudet, Senior Transportation Engineer with the City.
Hi everyone.
We are also joined by team members from Urban Systems, who are the consultants on this project and will be leading tonight's meeting. We have Brent McMurtry, a transportation engineer.
Hey everyone.
Danny Gray, who will be helping us manage the Q&A forum.
Good evening.
And Brian Patterson, the project manager for Urban Systems.
Hi everybody.
We'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge the loss of Kathy Watts, a well-respected member of the community and cycling advocate. We feel privileged to have had the pleasure of working with her for several years. She will be missed. Our thoughts go out to her family and friends.
Please note that the meeting will be recorded tonight and posted to the city's Engage page for the Neighbourhood Bikeways Project. This will allow residents who were unable to attend tonight's meeting to watch the video and let us know if they have any comments or concerns. We appreciate your patience as we go through the material and adjust to this new platform of online meetings. I apologize in advance if you experience any delays. It just depends on everyone's network connection. If you have a significant delay, you may wish to turn on your closed captioning to help you follow along. To ensure that the meeting runs smoothly and that we minimize technical difficulties with audio, we ask that you type your comments in the question and answer box and Danny will read them out. If you are joining us on a smartphone, you may also experience a delay in the video when you're typing your comments. If you are unable to type your comments or you have any other technical issues during the meeting, you can always reach out to us through one of the other engagement methods to submit your comments or questions. We have options for emails, phone calls, the Engage page, and letters. Details will be provided later in the meeting. I hope that everyone has had a chance to review our video series, which provides an overview of the Neighbourhood Bikeways Project, common design solutions that we use for Bikeways facilities, and the proposed designs for 14th Street. The main focus of tonight's meeting will be on the proposed designs. I will now pass it over to Brian so we can begin outlining our designs.
Great, thank you, Carly, and good evening, everybody. Thanks again for joining tonight's session. Again, my name is Brian Patterson. I'm a transportation planner who works for Urban Systems and is working with the City of Saskatoon staff on the Neighbourhood Bikeways Project. So again, want to welcome everybody to this third virtual open house for the second round of engagement for the Neighbourhood Bikeways Project. And in the second round of engagement, we're hosting these series of virtual open houses for each project corridor. This is the third virtual open house in the Neighbourhood Bikeways series, focusing on the 14th Street East corridor. So through the presentation this evening, I will provide a brief overview of the project, explaining kind of the overall study process and context, and then walking through some of the details of the corridor. And as Carly mentioned, more details about the project can be found through a series of videos and other materials that are posted on the city's webpage. So we're doing this virtual open house, of course, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and through that, all City of Saskatoon public engagement is being conducted virtually for the time being. This virtual platform still provides an opportunity to obtain input through this modified process. Your input is important to us, and we want to ensure there was an opportunity for you to provide input and feedback on the proposed designs. So as I mentioned in this meeting, I'll provide a brief overview of the project, including a study overview, some key features of the design, and the recommended design for 14th Street East. This will be followed by a question and answer where you can type in your questions in the Q&A and the project team will strive to answer your questions. As I mentioned, more information is available through a series of videos that are posted on the city's Engage webpage, as you can see on the slide here. And again, just a reminder, this meeting will be recorded and posted to the city's webpage. So Carly mentioned a few housekeeping items. I'll just remind you of these in terms of how the meeting will run. If you do have questions as I'm working through the presentation, feel free to type those in through the Q&A tool, and you should see a notification announcement now. And with the question and answers after the presentation, we'll come back and go through and answer any questions you may have. So let's get into the overview of the project and the event itself. So the purpose of this study is really recognizing that the city is committed to promoting active transportation and providing transportation choices that are safe and comfortable for people of all ages and abilities year-round. This project will help identify measures to provide more travel choices and improve safety, accessibility, and connectivity. Your input is important to discuss these issues, opportunities, and potential design treatments for each corridor. 5 corridors have been identified in the active transportation plan that have been included in this Neighbourhood Bikeways project. These include 29th Street or 31st Street West from Circle Drive to Idlewild Drive, Dudley Street from Dawes Avenue to Spadina Crescent, 3rd Avenue North from 25th Street East to 2nd Avenue North, 14th Street East from Saskatchewan Crescent to Cumberland Avenue, which we'll be talking about this evening, and Victoria Avenue from 8th Street to Taylor Street East, which is being designed by city staff. So as I mentioned, this is the 3rd event so far as part of this virtual public open house series. We've had events already on the 31st Street corridor and the Dudley Street corridor. So in terms of the study process we're working through, this study is being completed through 5 phases of work. The first phase, early in 2020, consisted of a review of existing conditions. We also conducted public engagement to hear feedback from community members on concerns and considerations. And through that input, over the course of the spring and summer, we have prepared and completed conceptual designs for each of the Neighbourhood Bikeways corridors. So the purpose of this virtual open house is to present the recommended concept for the 14th Street East corridor and to answer any questions you might have. So before we get into the details of the specific design treatments for this corridor, I'll provide a bit of an overview of all ages and abilities cycling facilities. So all ages and abilities cycling or active transportation facilities are safe and comfortable for people walking and cycling regardless of their age and ability. There are 3 different types of all ages and abilities or AAA cycling facilities that were considered for each of the study corridors. We have protected bike lanes, multi-use pathways, and neighborhood bikeways. I'll explain the features of the different facilities in the next few slides. So let's start with protected bike lanes and multi-use pathways. Both protected bicycle lanes and multi-use pathways provide physical separation between motorists and people cycling, which allows for safe and comfortable cycling even when traffic volumes and speeds are high. Looking at protected bike lanes on the left, these are typically used when physical separation is required because traffic speeds and volumes cannot be adequately reduced to provide an all ages and abilities facility. Whereas multi-use pathways on the right are typically built within parks, utility corridors, greenway corridors, or other locations where on-street cycling facilities are not suitable or desired. The third type of AAA facility are neighborhood bikeways. These are facilities where design treatments are used to ensure low traffic volumes and speeds so that people walking and cycling are more comfortable. Depending on the existing traffic speeds and volumes, traffic calming measures may be required to reduce traffic volumes and speeds. Neighborhood bikeways typically do not impact on-street parking. To be comfortable for people of all ages and abilities, traffic volumes ideally should be less than 1,500 vehicles per day, and drivers should be traveling at 30 kilometers per hour or less. And you'll see some of these design considerations when we walk through the key elements of the corridor. You can kind of see an example image in the picture here, where this is really a shared roadway without dedicated or separated bicycle lanes. This is an environment where the traffic speeds and volumes are low and people cycling really share the road with motor vehicles. So let's talk a little bit about the 14th Street corridor itself, and I'll start with some existing conditions and then we'll present our recommended treatments. So the 14th Street East corridor runs for approximately 10 blocks from Saskatchewan Crescent and the Meewasin Trail in the west through to Cumberland Avenue in the east. The corridor fills an important gap in the cycling network and provides a connection to the Meewasin Trail network in the west, as well as to an existing multi-use pathway on the north side of 14th Street East, east of Cumberland Avenue in the east. The corridor is an important route to access the University of Saskatchewan, and other destinations near the study corridor include the Broadway Shopping District, Royal University and Children's Hospitals, and the downtown. So when we look at existing conditions for each user, this slide here shows a series of maps. The map on the top is looking at existing pedestrian facilities and shows that sidewalks exist on both sides of the street for most of the corridor. In addition, the Meewasin Trail runs perpendicular to the corridor at the west end, and an existing pedestrian and cyclist activated signal is located at Clarence Avenue along the corridor. The map in the middle shows that currently there's no transit routes along the 14th Street East, but there are transit routes that intersect the corridor at Lansdowne Avenue, Clarence Avenue, and Cumberland Avenue. And finally, the map on the bottom shows on-street parking utilization along the corridor, which shows that parking usage is moderate throughout most of the corridor, with an average parking utilization of around 50% for most blocks along the corridor. So through the first round of public engagement, we asked community members what they would like to see improved along the corridor. Some of the most common responses included education for people driving on how the bike signal works, specifically at Clarence Avenue, improved road surface condition and snow clearing, the desire for a future cycling connection on Wiggins Avenue, improved connections to the University of Saskatchewan and across Cumberland Avenue, and the opportunity for reduced speeds along the corridor. These opportunities and challenges were identified through that first round of public engagement, and they have directly influenced the recommended design presented in the following slides. So let's walk through some of the key elements of the design. And as I mentioned, 14th Street is designed as a shared neighborhood bikeway. So again, a neighborhood bikeway being a facility with low traffic volumes and low speeds, where cyclists share the road with motor vehicles. This neighborhood bikeway would then transition to the existing multi-use pathway east of Cumberland Avenue on 14th Street East. And with a neighborhood bikeway design, as I mentioned, on-street parking would be maintained on both sides of the street throughout the majority of the corridor, and traffic flow would remain as it is today with two-way vehicle traffic along the street. So let's start with a few more details working in the west of the corridor, and we'll work our way east. So if we start at Saskatchewan Crescent, looking at the design treatments along the corridor to ensure the street is comfortable and safe for people walking and biking. At Saskatchewan Crescent, we've identified a new painted crosswalk and a new all-way stop control that will improve in intersection safety and connections to the Meewasin Trail. We would have parking maintained on both sides of the street for the corridor. And at University Drive, stop signs would be reversed to allow people biking on 14th Street to travel at continuous free flow. Currently, the stop signs are oriented east-west, but we would reverse those to north-south. Moving towards Temperance Street and Lansdowne Avenue, we have developed 3 different intersection options for the closure between Temperance Street and Lansdowne Avenue. All 3 options would add curb extensions to shorten pedestrian crossing distance and change the intersection traffic control to add stop signs for north-south traffic on both Temperance Street and Lansdowne Avenue to allow people walking and biking to move through the area without stopping. And we've developed 3 different options, as you can see on the slides here. The first option on the left is to create a unidirectional or one-way bicycle lanes with a plaza area between the westbound and eastbound lanes. The second option in the middle is to create bidirectional or two-way bike lanes on the north side of the street to allow the plaza space to be adjusted to the south curb. And the final option on the right, option 3, is to create bidirectional bike lanes on the south side of the street with the plaza space adjacent to the north curb. And as you can see from each of these options, there is an opportunity to have some placemaking and activate the space. And what these options really show is the configuration of the bike lane and the potential plaza space in each of these 3 configurations. We'll be coming back to these options a little bit later in the presentation to get your feedback on which of these options you prefer. So as we continue moving east from Lansdowne Avenue to Clarence Avenue, again, parking would be maintained throughout this section. Some of the other changes include yield signs on Albert Avenue, which would be changed to stop signs, and a new sidewalk is proposed on the south side of 14th Street, east of Albert Avenue, to improve pedestrian safety and connectivity, pending further evaluation of feasibility. Continuing onwards from Clarence Avenue to Munroe Avenue, again, as with other segments of the corridor, parking is maintained. A new painted north-south crosswalk would be provided at Clarence Avenue to improve pedestrian safety at the existing bicycle signal. We would propose new curb extensions at McKinnon Avenue to improve pedestrian safety and reduce traffic speeds. And we're proposing a new sidewalk on the north side of 14th Street East to fill sidewalk gaps and improve pedestrian safety, pending further evaluation of feasibility. Continuing onwards from Munroe Avenue to Ewart Avenue, new curb extensions are proposed at Wiggins Avenue to improve pedestrian safety and reduce traffic speeds. Parking would be maintained along the corridor, and yield signs would be changed to stop signs. And then finally, the last segment of the corridor takes us to Cumberland Avenue, and this is where there's a transition to the existing multi-use pathway on the north side of 14th Street East, east of Cumberland Avenue. And so we've developed two options on how we might approach that transition to the existing multi-use pathway. For option one, this would involve adding a bidirectional raised cycle track on the north side of the street to improve the safety and connectivity to the multi-use pathway east of Cumberland Avenue. This option would maintain parking on the south side of the street, but would remove parking on the north side of the street directly adjacent to the raised cycle track. Option two would keep the Neighbourhood Bikeway shared street treatment all the way to Cumberland Avenue, where a two-phase crossing with cross rides and curb extensions would improve the safety and connectivity to the multi-use pathway east of Cumberland Avenue. This option, option two, would maintain parking on both sides of the street. So with both of these options, again, after the presentation, we'll come back and we'd like to get your feedback, and we'll have a voting exercise to get a sense of your perspectives and preferences for each of these two options. So with that provides an overview of the corridor. We'll open it up for questions and answer and discussion, but recognizing there are opportunities to provide feedback on this concept over the coming weeks. So of course, through tonight's open house, the project team is available to answer any questions you might have. You can also share your feedback by visiting saskatoon.ca/engage, share your ideas again at tonight's meeting, provide input on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or fill out an online questionnaire at the end of the event. So with that, we will open it up for any questions and answers that we might have.
Brian, there is a question about flipping the orientation of stop signs to encourage more vehicle traffic along the route, and wondering if it would increase volumes and possible speed, having a negative effect on improving it for cycling.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what we're trying to do by reorienting that stop sign at University Drive is to make it as seamless a connection as possible for people cycling along the corridor with that direct connection without needing to stop. But of course, that also makes it more convenient for people driving. With the closure at Temperance and Lansdowne, that would help to mitigate that because it isn't a through route through the corridor. And really with only 2 blocks essentially between Saskatchewan Crescent and Temperance Street, that's not enough distance that we would anticipate we would see increases in speeds or volumes even with the reorientation of that stop sign.
And another participant, through their experience, identified that University Drive as a de facto bike lane when campus is hosting people. Their observation is that it is much more often used by bikers than 14th between University and Meewasin. Has that been a consideration?
14th Street. So I'm just orienting myself here for University Drive. It's a de facto bike lane when campus is hosting people. So I suppose University Drive has a bit of a different desire line than the intent of the 14th Street corridor. So certainly I think what we are looking here at the 14th Street corridor is to provide that east-west connection between Saskatchewan Crescent and the pathway east of Cumberland. But we did hear through the first round of engagement there is a desire for kind of those broader connections to the university, especially north-south connections on University Drive. We also heard Wiggins Avenue in particular. There was a desire line for more routes. So, you know, recognize maybe University Drive also is a high desire line, but maybe serves a bit of a different purpose or function than what we're looking at here. And as part of a broader network, that's a good consideration for maybe future opportunities.
What kind of education has been done at Clarence and 14th, as one user's experiences, it confuses drivers?
Certainly, we heard quite a lot of feedback about the cycling signal at Clarence Avenue and 14th Street East. Perhaps I'll turn that over to the city in case there's any commentary they might be able to offer on education that might have been conducted.
Yeah, I can provide a bit more on that. We have installed a sign that says cyclists use signal on 14th Street, kind of near the bike signal, to help clarify that the intent is that signal is for cyclists and drivers should be stopping at the stop sign to proceed through the intersection. We also have an FAQ on our website that helps explain how different users can use the intersection, and we are looking at some other options for how we can reach out and continue to educate on this new device.
I'll maybe jump in here, Brian, and good opportunity. Something that we've talked about sharing is we heard that as well through our public engagement, and so we have a little video of the operation of the bike signal at Clarence, and figured that it's a good time to for the people that are participating at this open house, we can kind of run through. So I'll just walk through how this operates, identifying a few key features to have this as some informal education as well. So this is filmed from a car approaching the signal, and you can see the stop sign for motor vehicles, whereas the bike signal is actually only for people who are cycling. So at this intersection, the vehicles on Clarence Avenue are controlled by a typical signal, but the signal is actuated by people crossing who are walking or biking, whereas motorists are stop controlled. So they're waiting for a gap in traffic. And I think sometimes when infrastructure is new and you see something that potentially looks like a traffic signal that you're used to following as a driver, what we heard is, yeah, there's some drivers that are not familiar with this signal, even though it's still red for bikes. When there's a clear gap for motorists, they're able to proceed. So just a quick video highlighting how that works. And I think that with new infrastructure, sharing with your community members, neighbors, family, friends, yeah, it's a great way to help everyone that you know and engage with learn about new facilities.
So we have a couple comments followed by a question. There was a comment that stop sign reorientation is a good idea because it's very dangerous to see traffic due to the large shrubs, and that the university sign is also a good idea. This is followed by a question if 12th has been considered instead of 14th, as 14th is very congested due to parking, the parking needs. Lots of rentals and Airbnbs and residents along that corridor.
Yeah, certainly. So as part of this process, and also through the active transportation plan that was developed a few years ago, 14th Street was identified as kind of the preferred east-west corridor in this area. When we look at 12th Street and look at some of the differences between the two corridors, one of the advantages of 14th Street is it's a local street, so the traffic volumes are likely a little bit lower than 12th Street, which is classified as a collector. I believe 12th Street is a transit route as well, and we don't have transit on 14th Street. And 14th Street also provides that direct connection to the existing multi-use pathway east of Cumberland. So it does fill kind of a bit of a broader desire line. Whereas when we look at 12th Street, especially east of Cumberland Avenue, it doesn't provide as direct of a connection further east in the city. So those were some of the factors that we looked at. Certainly we recognize there is parking on both sides of the street on 14th Street, but with the cross section, that actually in some ways can help to keep traffic speeds and volumes fairly low by having that on street parking. So in some ways it helps to kind of make it more comfortable by keeping traffic volumes and speeds lower.
I apologize. There was also a subsequent comment to 14th Street and 12th Street question. Identifying 14th as a feeder street to the restaurant, adding danger and reducing safety to cyclists. I guess the subsequent one to that is, how can you consider 14th as a biking corridor without considering the impacts on cyclists on other streets or patterns, such as the University corridor to campus or University Hospital from Nutana areas?
Yeah, so this is considering the impact on cyclists. I'm not sure if I understand the question in terms of kind of what those impacts to cyclists would be on other streets. Those other streets, if cyclists are currently using them, would for the time being remain as they are today, but this would just improve the connections on this particular corridor. I'm not sure if the person who typed this might be able to kind of expand on maybe what their concerns are about the impacts to cyclists on other streets, or if anybody from the city has any thoughts on kind of the broader network connections as well.
Brian, I think that was related to the comment about the stop signs on University and stopping, on Saskatchewan Crescent and University corridors,
Right.
rather than stopping 14th Street.
I see. Yeah. So certainly, some trade-offs to be considered in considering, the different cycling volumes and needs, and maybe that's something we can think about. And if University Drive in the future was to be kind of considered for cycling improvements, maybe that's something that could be looked at to improve the connection for people in all directions.
Hey, Brian, I'm going to jump in here now just to make sure, all of the attendees are still here and asking these great questions, which we really appreciate, that we run through the three options that we have for the closure at Temperance, as well as the two different options at Cumberland. So I'm going to pull up a different presentation quickly and find my mouse, get your input on these three different options. So as Brian had mentioned during the presentation, these three options that we're showing are really about the configuration of what the bike facilities would look like through this closure, with option one being, 2 unidirectional bike lanes, option 2 bidirectional bike lane on the north side, and option 3 bidirectional on the south side. So I think that our intent and hope was that we could put each of those three into the Q&A. So Danny, maybe you can add those three as three separate questions or announcements, I guess, and that you attendees can vote on the one that you think is the best using the thumbs up icon. So if you hover your mouse over the thumbs up, you can select the one that you think would be the best fit for this location. And maybe while we're doing that, I will show some examples of what temporary closures or interim closures like this have looked like in other places. So we have some examples from Vancouver. I just think it's important to understand kind of the vision and the context, and understand that these spaces, even though currently maybe don't look like much, with community involvement and sort of building some support amongst your neighborhood and your communities, you can see how a space kind of transforms from being something that is really intended for vehicles to something that is yeah, a little bit more multimodal and create space for everyone. So this intersection that I'm showing is at 14th Avenue and Main Street in Vancouver. And you can kind of see the progression from a local street in 2011 to a local street where some of the parking had been removed to accommodate a parklet. So a little seating area for community members in 2015, and then taking that one step further in 2019, where there's actually a bidirectional protected bike lane on the one curb on the right-hand side of this photo. And then the rest of the space has been transformed to include a parklet as well as a small plaza area where there's bicycle parking, some sort of street painting that has helped to make the space a little bit more dynamic and interesting, as well as some planters. And so I think this is something that isn't probably in the immediate future, but sort of something to be aware of possibilities of how these different configurations could be looked at to create future spaces that are really fun and exciting and vibrant for the community members. So I haven't really been paying attention to the voting on the Q&A, if that is working. It doesn't look as though we have any thumbs up on any of them. So I'm not sure if our approach maybe hasn't worked, but if you have a preference, I can go back to the three options now, and I'll just leave this on the screen for a minute or so. So like I said, the configuration difference is whether or not you have unidirectional, so bike lanes on either side of the plaza space, bidirectional on the north side, so this would allow the curbside area most or adjacent to Delish to be a plaza space for the public, it's public realm, or if you had the bidirectional facility on the south side. Any questions or comments about that? I don't know if anything's come up while I've been chatting, Danny. Maybe I can pass it back over to Brian. Where actually I had one other slide showing a different way that these treatments can, or street closures can progress. So this is showing another intersection in Vancouver on 7th Avenue and Oak Street. And it's a location where there was a neighborhood bikeway, and there still is a neighborhood bikeway, where this was an intersection that was identified as a location where reducing traffic volumes would be desirable. And so initially when the neighborhood bikeway was created, this was a normal free flow local street crossing Oak Street. But over time, so this is maybe 2 years ago, that a full closure has been put in. And so you can see the transition looking in the exact same spot. It now has a small cul-de-sac with a space that's only permeable for people who are walking and biking, really allowing 7th Avenue, where the bikeway is, to be really calm and comfortable and quiet. So just a different option and sort of a more expensive treatment, but this is the sort of thing that if there is significant reconstruction that is required in the area anyways, it's potentially something that could be looked at into the future. Our configurations that we're showing are quite a bit more straightforward than that, using some planters and potentially some street furniture, but just looking at what the vision looking into the future could be. So I see now that there's been a few thumbs up in the question and answer, and so maybe I'll pass it back over to Brian here, or if we want to go to and then we can go to the Cumberland closure as well. I guess maybe, so I'm catching myself here, there's one more slide that I can go to, just sort of highlighting the transition between a neighborhood bikeway and a bidirectional protected facility like we are considering for the last block on 14th Street at the east end of the corridor near Cumberland. So this photo is showing another location in Vancouver where a neighborhood bikeway transitions to a bidirectional facility to improve a crossing of a major or more major street. And so this shows using pavement markings and some signage that you're able to communicate on low volume roads that when it's safe for cyclists to cross, that they're able to cross over. So just highlighting sort of what some of these facilities could potentially look like. The way we have designed it in on 14th Street is directly adjacent to the sidewalk, but just sort of a general idea of what it could look like. So I'll pass it back over to Brian.
We do have a comment, Brian, from one participant who feels 14th is not a local street due to the restaurant.
Yeah, so this is based on the city's, city has a road network classification and identifies the function of each roadway. And based on the citywide classification, it is classified as a local street. And 12th is classified as a collector street.
Do you know what the current average travel speed on 14th Street corridor is?
Yeah, so we do have volume or data for both traffic volumes and traffic speeds that were provided to us. And we have counts at 2 locations, one of which is between Albert Avenue and Lansdowne Avenue. So this shows about 200 vehicles per day, and the travel speeds for vehicles, we don't have the average. It's called the 85th percentile speeds, which is kind of a common metric used in transportation engineering. So 85th percentile is the speed at which 85% of people are traveling at or below. So it's a little bit different than the average, but the 85th percentile speed is 45 kilometers an hour. So that means 85% of people traveling along the corridor are traveling 45 kilometers or below. So it suggests that speeds are relatively low along the corridor, which means it's relatively comfortable already. We have another count location between McKinnon and Munroe Avenue. In this case, the traffic volumes are a little bit higher. They're about 600 per day compared to 200 per day between Albert and Lansdowne. But still, we found the 85th percentile was 45 kilometers per hour. So both of the count locations were 45 kilometers per hour.
We have a comment, the same is true for Saskatchewan Crescent. It is much more of a bike walk corridor than 14th Street. Has there been traffic counts on 14th, University, and Sask Crescent? I think they should be considered before the stop signs are reconfigured.
That I'm not sure if the city has. I don't have any data available specifically to those corridors. I don't know if the city has collected counts on those corridors. At least I don't have them at my fingertips right now. Yeah,
I can jump in there. I think that when we were looking at treatment options for this location, the benefit of the always stop is it requires everyone to move slowly, and sort of identifying that, yes, Saskatchewan Crescent is a desirable route for people cycling, as well as 14th Street and as well as the Mawassan Trail. It's a pretty complex area with a lot of different user types, and that creating something that requires people to slow down a little bit can often create an environment that's safe for everyone with a relatively low burden. So I think that it's already an area that's pretty heavily used, and having a pretty insignificant change would still allow everyone to experience and access where they need to go in a little bit slower, more comfortable way. So I think that was some of the rationale behind the always stop at 14th Street and Saskatchewan Crescent. And then I'll maybe bring this back to our second 2-option location that we discussed earlier, Brian discussed earlier in the presentation. So just if we could have the same sort of setup here where Danny, if you could enter in option 1 and option 2, and people could either, or just type in the option that you prefer. So now talking about that last transition up to the multi-use path on the north side of 14th Street, once you're east of Cumberland, and whether or not you would prefer option 1, the bidirectional cycle track for that last block, which creates a separated facility, but requires removing parking on half a block or 1 block of 14th Street on the north side of the street. And then the other option is adding curb extensions on all 4 corners, but requiring people who are biking to access the 14th Street multi-use path on the east side of Cumberland to make a multi-stage, like two-phase crossing. So those are the two options that we've considered and looked at. And so if you could enter in which of these options you would prefer. We'll maybe give it a minute or so, or if anyone has any questions about this specific location. Once again, it's a little bit of a complex location with desire lines for people who are biking and walking that are taking them towards this multi-use path. And something that we had heard was the transition from the multi-use path coming westbound, so coming from the university towards the Mewasan Trail, I guess, heading west, that this is a challenging location as far as sightlines for cyclists. It's on a bit of a grade, and so the curb extension on the northeast corner, the one that you can see in both images, is suggested for both, and then we will, depending on the preference and sort of the direction that the city chooses to go, we'll determine which of these two options is preferred to move forward with. So I don't know if we're seeing any options or votes here. People have typed anything in. I see one person has said the prefer to not lose any parking. Yeah, and I think that parking is definitely one consideration. It's something that, looking at some of our existing conditions report findings, is that the parking utilization, from what we know, is quite high during the day, especially on the east end of the corridor, but that overall throughout the entire day that it's about 50%. So losing half a block of parking on one side of the street is something that, as a project team, we thought was a suitable trade-off to provide an easier and safer connection for people who are biking. So if we don't have any more votes on these two options, we can see if there's more questions that come up, and I'll maybe pass it back over to Brian to answer any other questions.
Thanks, Brent. I do see a few further comments and questions about the traffic speeds. And a question: is the goal to get traffic speeds closer to 30 kilometers an hour, or is 45 kilometers per hour acceptable? So this is really looking at the speeds today and recognizing that's relatively comfortable. It's below 50 kilometers an hour already, but we would hope through some of the design treatments that we would further reduce traffic speeds to get the average speeds closer to 30 kilometers an hour. And that's what a number of the measures that I was explaining through the design would help to achieve. Things like curb extensions at some of the intersections are treatments that would help to reduce those traffic speeds even further and make it more comfortable.
Brian, there's a question on how wide the bikeway would be just west of Cumberland.
For the raised cycle track option.
Yeah, I can jump in there. Yeah, it's 3 meters wide. So we would retain the sidewalk, which I believe is a 1.8 meter sidewalk through that section, and have a 3 meter wide cycle track. Thanks everybody for continuing to get your questions in. I think that on our end, we're trying to figure out where we are at with having these sort of mini polls happening at the same time as the Q&A. So keep the questions flowing, whatever you guys are interested in hearing about. And we also have a little bit more filler information if we want to go. We have some dead space to fill as people are kind of racking their brains to get questions going. So thank you for everything that you've brought to this, and your questions and comments are what make these sessions very meaningful to the city and us. Thank you.
Brian, is there evidence a curb extension reduces bike injuries?
Thanks, Danny. Yeah, that's a good question. No, I haven't seen evidence saying there's any impact on bike injuries, and in fact, I think curb extensions can actually have the opposite benefits, again, in helping to reduce traffic volumes and speeds to make it more comfortable and safe for people cycling. A lot of the details with curb extensions come down to how they're designed, and recognizing with this type of neighborhood bikeway treatment, it's a little bit different than a painted bike lane configuration where you have a curb extension and you might be riding closer to the edge of the road. With a neighborhood bikeway and without dedicated bike lanes, really we're encouraging people cycling to ride in the middle of the travel lanes, essentially, which means it doesn't really create a pinch point or create any safety issues if it's designed well. And curb extensions, they're pretty common treatments that are applied for this type of design for neighborhood bikeways in cities across North America and have been done so successfully.
Will they have a cycle path through them, Brian?
Through the curb extensions, no, we don't think that's necessary. Again, cyclists would be riding in the middle of the roadway, not towards the edges, like if you were in painted bike lanes. So again, this design wouldn't involve painted bike lanes. Instead, cyclists would be riding in the center of the roadway, and they could just continue through those intersections without being impacted by the curb extensions. So you could just continue riding just as you are in a mid-block throughout the corridor without having to ride up and around the curb extensions.
One participant understands the speed limit is 50. Is the goal to reduce that to 30?
Based on best practice and kind of international design guidance for neighborhood bikeways, we know that to be comfortable for people cycling to share the road with vehicles, we aim to have people traveling at 30 kilometers an hour. When you have bicycles mixing with vehicles traveling 50 kilometers an hour, it's a less comfortable environment. So what we're hoping to do through this design, the aim is to reduce operating speeds or vehicle speeds to 30 kilometers an hour, really looking at design treatments. And again, that's where things like the curb extensions and some of the other traffic calming features that are part of this design would be designed to create that environment where it's more comfortable for everybody to travel a little bit more slowly at 30 kilometers an hour. And Brent was kind of speaking to that with the stop signs as well.
Yeah, I'll just jump in there as well. Sorry to expand on what Brian said. Changing the posted speed limit to 30 kilometers per hour would require a council decision to make that change. So we would have to take it to council to implement that.
Thanks, Natalie. We also have a comment that parking must be considered as a lower priority than safe and fluid transition to existing bike lanes north of 14th.
Yeah, it's a good comment and certainly kind of reflects some of the trade-offs that we're looking at through this design and why we presented the option specifically for Cumberland Avenue there, and kind of recognizing those trade-offs, but also recognizing one of our project goals is to provide a cycling facility that is safe and comfortable for people of all ages and abilities. So that is an important objective of the project, but certainly being mindful of how to balance the trade-offs, whether it's on-street parking or trade-offs with other road users.
Circling back to Sask Crescent being much more of a bike or walk corridor than 14th Street, the participant rides the 14th Cumberland intersection many times and feels if the bike path was merged onto 14th Street roadway, it would be a more workable intersection for bicyclists. Also, please understand that there are a few people making the transition to west of Cumberland. Many turn northward to the U of S.
Brent, would you be able to provide any commentary on that one?
I can try. I think that, yeah, this is one of those challenges with COVID and doing things virtually. Sometimes it's really or it's always really nice to get a chance to connect and see people face to face and point at a map. So I think that based off my interpretation of the question comment, something that we know and had heard was a common cycling route is for people to stay on street as they're heading west of Cumberland, and instead of using the multi-use path. And so I think that the design as we're showing it would still accommodate people to comfortable cyclists who are comfortable riding in traffic to do that with either of these two options, with the hope being that by providing a safer connection and something that potentially looks at signal phasing and other ways to expedite the wait, or I guess reduce the wait time for people crossing and accessing that multi-use path, that there may be more cyclists that instead of choosing to continue on street further on 14th would choose to connect at Cumberland to get onto the multi-use path. And then for the comment, yeah, so I think that's everything that I took from that. I don't know if anyone from the city has anything else, or Brian, can pass it back to you.
No, I don't think I have anything to add.
Okay.
So I will then expand further here. How do these options at 14th and Cumberland affect the pedestrian crossing experience in terms of safety? It seems the curb extensions in option 2 would be preferable.
I can take that as well, Brian. So I think, yeah, definitely a great comment and a good point to consider how pedestrian safety and comfort is sort of accounted for. The one, I think that, as you noted, having curb extensions for the pedestrians reduces their crossing distance, so we'll make it a shorter crossing, which is often safer and more comfortable. One of the things to consider is, as we've designed it, it would be a mixing area. So we're showing cross-ride crossings on all 4 legs of the intersection in option 2, with the hope being that people who are biking would see that there's an option for them to continue on their bike to ride over to the multi-use path. So that might create a less desirable sort of pedestrian experience as you're sharing that space with people on bikes. But overall, yeah, definitely good considerations either way. I think this being a fully signalized intersection, the pedestrians do have pedestrian phases, but they're not exclusive. There's turning movements that conflict with them, and so having curb extensions would likely make it a little bit more safe and comfortable for pedestrians.
Well, Brent, if we could expand on this, there was a comment, if curb extensions create danger for cyclists, then how is it prudent to do this and incur the expense? And I believe this goes back to some of the comments Brian was making relating to curb extensions. Yeah, so I think speaking to, it's a real challenge to sort of distinguish between a curb extension on a street where a cyclist is riding potentially next to the gutter or very close to where there's parked vehicles and would be pushed out by a curb extension. Whereas the design intent of the streets that we're showing, and it's hard for you to see on these plans, but the sharrow pavement markings that identify where the cyclist is supposed to be or intended to be riding is in the center of the travel lane. And so the idea would be that cyclists, this is really a bicycle priority street where people who are driving on it are there to access their homes. There's not any restrictions, but at the same time, the intent is that they are sort of guests on a street that is really intended to be used for slow and comfortable mobility by all. And so when people are riding in, and maybe I'll scroll back up to, we had some example photos, or a example photo very early in the presentation that showed what, I have to get there, there we go. So what a neighborhood bikeway may look like. So you can see in this picture
with cyclists riding in the middle of a local street, if there was a curb extension, it wouldn't have any impact on the cyclists, other than potentially creating a narrowing point where motorists would likely slow down. So there's a lot of evidence around a narrower roadway creates slower travel speeds. So I think the goal around the curb extensions, sort of the Cumberland intersection is a little bit of a unique case, but the other curb extensions is to slow down motor vehicle traffic. And by creating a narrower roadway, you're creating a safer crossing for pedestrians, but you're also creating a visual narrowing that causes motorists to drive slower, and that people who are cycling are going to be riding as seen in this picture. That's the intent. And I think that as there continues to be more and more people biking along these corridors, so they won't feel as though they're being pushed by a curb extension into motor vehicle traffic.
Brent, I'm going to revisit a question, as one of the participants felt it wasn't maybe responded to appropriately. It's back to the Cumberland intersection, and I've kind of revisited it a few times here just to try to understand exactly where it was going. But the comment is suggesting that if the bike path was merged onto the 14th Street roadway, it would be a more workable intersection, suggesting that more cyclists turn northward on the U of S than transition west to Cumberland. Just to get some clarity on that.
Okay, yeah, so I'm just gonna once again scroll through all these slides, which is not the prettiest thing to do, but made it there. Yeah, so I think the comment here is that cyclists who are continuing up to U of S are heading eastbound on 14th Street and want to make that left turn. So I think that... Sorry,
Brent, I think it's westbound heading north. So from the multi-use pathway on Cumberland, okay, and then north to the university.
And is that currently being done on street? Would those cyclists turn northbound on street, or are they traveling on the sidewalk? So yeah, once again, challenge. Maybe Natalie, I can share your face with the rest of the participants.
Well, I think the comment was related to having the cyclists merge onto the street before they get to the Cumberland intersection so that they can transition to northward more comfortably, possibly, if I'm interpreting that properly. I'm not sure. Okay. So they're saying east of Cumberland, bring the cyclists back onto the street so that they can transition whichever direction.
Okay, yeah, so I think that part of it was outside of the area that we were reviewing with this project, but I think that moving forward, and something that we heard was the way the multi-use path east of Cumberland sort of operates. It's not a super direct route, and so there's already some cyclists that are coming on street onto 14th, and I think that potentially by having this curb extension on the northeast corner, that you'll create an environment where a cyclist who's coming on the multi-use path would have a bit of a protection as they enter onto 14th Street heading north. But that's maybe something that, and I'm not sure if it's part of the active transportation network, if that's something, a future connection that can be considered, noting that U of S is definitely a major destination.
Yeah, I can just jump in really quickly, speaking from the AT network side of things. Certainly we're aware of the Desire Line and the volume of cyclists that we do see on Cumberland, as well as several other streets in this north-south area towards the university. And so being cognizant of ensuring that any connections that we do put in the meantime would be easily used by cyclists heading in that direction, as well as cognizant of how the future network will evolve in this area. So those are all considerations that we're looking at this time.
Thanks, Danae. there is a question and maybe some misinterpretation of the plans or the drawings, just given that some people are viewing them on mobiles and they're smaller in size. So is the total width of the bike lane and walkway west of Cumberland 4.8 meters or 3 meters?
So yeah, it would be 4.8 meters, 3 meters of 4.8 or 4.5, depending on the width of the existing sidewalk. So there's a 3 meter dedicated cycling facility and the existing sidewalk width, which would remain.
And has there been a study of current usage by cyclists of the 14th Street corridor?
So I don't believe that was in our traffic counts. I don't know if the city has done bike counts. Yeah, I'm not sure, and maybe that's something to flag, and especially if there are going to be improvements made to this corridor, that it would be worth monitoring what those cyclist counts are in advance and then afterwards. I'm unsure.
There is one final comment on the Cumberland intersection. If the westbound bicyclist was on the street at the intersection, then they could easily cross Cumberland and the raised bikeway would not be necessary. If they were going north, then they could stay on the sidewalk all the way around the corner.
So I think that the comment is, yeah, that a westbound cyclist, this raised cycle track is not quite as required, and that's definitely the case. I think that we were not only thinking about the westbound cyclists, we're also thinking about the eastbound cyclists and the challenges of needing to cross both 14th Street and Cumberland to access either U of S or the multi-use pathway north of 14th Street. So yeah, I think that that's a fair comment, and one of the challenges when, yeah, it's always hard when you're working with bidirectional facilities, make more sense in one direction than the other, or maybe have more of a need in one direction than the other.
And further to the eastbound comment, Brent, the one participant is asking if the diagonal pattern to get to the raised bike path is safe.
Yeah, and so that's something that we chatted about as a team quite a bit, and I think that's something that the city would need to monitor and sort of keep aware of. There are other examples, sort of the example that I showed, and there's other examples of transitioning from a local street to a bidirectional facility, really with the intent of creating clear indication to people who are both biking and driving that this is a shared space and that cyclists are potentially crossing over. So it really would be no different than if a cyclist was turning, I guess an eastbound cyclist was turning left onto Bottomley Avenue. So if that cyclist is turning left onto Bottomley Avenue, they need to yield to oncoming vehicles. And it's the same movement that would be required for them to transition onto the bidirectional path. So they would need to yield to oncoming pedestrians, cyclists, and motor vehicles. And that just needs to be clear through the design cues that are used.
Sorry, Danny, I'm just going to jump in because I see there was a comment earlier, a question when we were talking about the posted speed limit. So somebody asked, why not just have a reduced speed limit? And I thought I'd give a bit of an update on the residential speed limit review that is currently underway. So City Council did ask us to undertake a review of how speed limits are set for our residential streets. So some of the things we are reviewing is including lowering the posted speed limit on residential streets. So either a 30 kilometer per hour or 40 kilometer per hour options, reducing speed limits in playground zones, and potential for establishing a new senior zone. So we anticipate that we'll undertake some engagement in 2021 for that study, and that we'll be presenting that to council in 2021 as well.
Thanks for catching that, Natalie, and for circling back on that. And there is another question relating to one of the goals of having more people using clean and healthy transportation modes in the city. What impact will placing stop signs on Sask Crescent and University, etc., on this have on this? People accessing and using transportation, clean, healthy transportation. And then I'll follow up with a second question following that. Their comment is typically cycling to the Meewasin is a leisure activity. Choosing to commute to work and school is impacted by time and convenience. Their concern is that hasn't been considered in placing stop signs on certain streets.
Yeah, so I think this goes back to some of the earlier questions about the stop signs for both Sask Crescent and University Drive, and I think it's a fair comment that we've heard, and we need to recognize and balance the needs of people cycling, whether it's north-south to the university or along 14th Street East. But recognizing we also need to look at the safety considerations as well, and I think that is an important part for Saskatchewan Crescent, that intersection there, and making sure that because we have cyclists and vehicles traveling in all directions and trying to access the pathway, adding the pedestrian crosswalks and the stop signs will have a significant safety benefit, and recognize, yes, those stop signs might have some impacts on travel times. It would be quite small, relatively speaking, by adding in that stop sign for people cycling.
As someone who lives on 14th Cumberland intersection, many continue east and use Bottomley or Wiggins to the U of S.
So I think that was just related to the other user saying that most cyclists headed northbound at Cumberland. So they're saying they are seeing a lot of cyclists head west as well. Thanks for the comment.
One participant encourages doing a bike count because they believe this plan was based on a study or report that was done in the neighborhood about 15 years ago.
Yeah, and it could be useful to get an understanding of the current usage along the corridor, but it's also important to look at what the anticipated usage would be by creating a corridor that really is comfortable for people of all ages and abilities. We know from evidence and experience across North America, but that by designing a street with low traffic volumes and low speeds will attract a lot more cyclists. So it's certainly helpful to kind of understand the cycling patterns along 14th Street and the surrounding area, but we're also kind of looking forward based on the research and evidence about the effectiveness of a treatment like this, about how many future cyclists we might anticipate along the corridor.
And I'll maybe just add to that, Brian, that similarly, based off the feedback that we heard during the first round of public engagement, we heard from a lot of people in the cycling community who identified 14th as a really key component of their existing travel and existing route. So I think that it's important to recognize all of those different perceptions, and people experience facilities from very different points of view and that they're all valid. So thank you for the comment.
Yeah, and I'll just expand on that as well. I'm kind of alluding to something that Danae mentioned earlier. It's about building the network. So the east-west corridor along 14th Street is one component of the network. But as we start making those north-south connections as well, we'll start to get more use along 14th. Usage will continue to grow as we build the network and have a completely connected cycling facilities. Since we're seeing a bit of a lull, I noticed that we have Councillor Block was able to join us this evening. Councillor Block, was there anything you wanted to share with the participants tonight?
Let's just see what I have to do here. Okay, I'm turning on my video. Am I there? Oh, I am there. I look. Okay. Hi, everyone. Sorry, I just sent you guys a long message because I actually am supposed to be somewhere in 3 minutes, but that's okay if I'm late. Okay, so thank you so much for everyone who's sharing your comments. I also just want to say a very sincere thank you to the consultant on this project, but especially our staff who have been sort of the foundation behind it all the way through. I have, as a result of the promotion of this event tonight, heard from quite a few folks. I will say that probably the most I'm hearing is some concerns about the stop signs on Sask Crescent. You know, how might we help folks better understand those best practices? Overall, I think that this is how we move forward as a city. If we look at the evidence and data that we have seen from other cities across North America and beyond, it's that connectivity that changes the patterns and allows that ridership to grow. Without that connectivity, we won't see that. I've had some folks say that, you know, and this was asked by some of your guests tonight about different streets that maybe it would be more appropriate to be on because 14th Street already feels pretty comfortable. But the idea is that if you have a roadway that is not as busy as other streets, you have an opportunity to grow that ridership. So those are the pieces that I think the evidence and the data definitely shows. And I've had the opportunity over the last few years to attend a few conferences to understand better how and why they work. And I just think that we are not used to this as a city, and our ability to move this forward is actually exciting at this exact juncture. You know, given that a lot more people are riding bikes. If you ask the local bike shops, they'll tell you that they don't have any. They've had a very, very busy time during COVID. And I think with the advent of the fat bikes and the e-bikes, the trend is likely to continue. And in other cities, notably Calgary, Edmonton, Winnipeg, they were doing a lot of the same things we were doing, which is trying a little bit here and trying a little bit there. But what they finally decided to do is to look at what the connectivity actually means for the overall network and your ability to increase ridership. And, you know, those issues are, you know, there are health issues, there's equity issues, and there's just choice issues. And so I'm excited to see our city move forward in this way. And I think that we just have to be careful that as we do it, we're being sensitive to all of the other uses of those roadways. And what I'm hearing tonight is it's actually pretty exciting that we can still keep the parking on the street, that it's already not a very fast roadway. All of those things are encouraging in terms of this particular piece as a choice. And, you know, if I could just say one other thing, somebody who was a very strong proponent of the bikeways was Kathy Watts, who recently passed away. And what I learned from her, and it wasn't just from her, it was from her wealth of understanding of the world and the information she provided, is that it is that connectivity that changes everything. That as long as, if you had a bus route and it just went somewhere, no one is ever going to take the bus, because you need to have it connected all the way through for people to have confidence in that system, to try out that system, to feel like it's something that might be for them. So on that note, thank you very much. I've taken up enough of everyone's time, but I just really appreciate all the feedback and really appreciate the work that everyone has undertaken to get us this far. And I look forward to the road ahead, the cycling path ahead. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Councillor Block, for taking the time. I know you have a busy schedule. We appreciate you being able to be here and hear the feedback directly from the meeting attendees. Are there any more comments, Danny, that we have to go through?
Yep, we do have a couple new questions or comments that have come forward. One comment is that there are no proper sidewalks between Temperance and Sask Crescent for several blocks. And I know the city's been working on some of that work, sidewalk work, and maybe Danae, if you could speak to some of that.
Yeah, I sure can, Danny. Thanks. So yes, the city has been looking at sidewalk infill for the past couple of years, and certainly we know the gaps exist, and there are lots of gaps in our sidewalk network. Installing sidewalks in existing neighborhoods can be quite challenging due to the presence of physical constraints such as trees, utilities, fences. Certainly, I know along this corridor there's some really beautiful trees that are right where that pathway for a sidewalk would be. So these constraints require really careful consideration to ensure that the project is feasible prior to construction. So right now, our sidewalk infill program is focusing on prioritization, planning, and assessing the feasibility of those locations. And with the active transportation corridor being along 14th, we would certainly be looking at these locations and considering those constraints and opportunities as well.
Thanks, Danae. There is another comment, and maybe it's partially a question. One applicant feels a push-button stop at Sask Crescent, as is on Cumberland, may be a better option.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. And I think given the amount of comments we've had about the stop signs and about the intersection specifically at Saskatchewan Crescent, I think these are great ideas and suggestions, and we can take these away and look at whether that might make sense. And again, looking at the need to kind of balance people traveling in each direction and all road users, and kind of look at what the best solution might be here. But certainly appreciate the suggestion.
Finally, another participant supports the connectivity and thinks it makes sense. They feel the problem is that if this is the goal and the direction the city is going, then it would be better to just have public educational sessions, as these engagement sessions always feel like we are invited, but our ideas are not valid because the direction has already been set.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. I think that it's always a challenge with public engagement and sort of going through the process, and especially in this virtual world that we're working in because of the COVID-19 pandemic, that it's important to gain feedback and ideas, but balancing that with us sharing sort of the rationale that has led to the decisions that have brought them to the point where they're at now. And so I think that try to balance that with things like the options that we were showing for some of the key locations tonight, identifying that there are still some areas that we as a project team aren't completely settled on. And I think that recognizing that the feedback that we hear tonight has an influence to the design moving forward, and that any of your comments and questions are really greatly appreciated. So I really appreciate everybody taking their time, taking time out of their day or evening to share their thoughts with us. And I think that it appears that you guys have done an amazing job of providing us with lots and lots of discussion points, and not requiring me to sing and dance like I maybe had practiced or was ready to do to fill some dead air. No one wants to see that, but yeah, so I just wanted to say thank you, and with that, I'll pass it over to Carly to say a final thank you from the city. So. At least I'll try.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. If you have not had a chance to select your preferred choice for either of the design options, please either enter that in the Q&A or scroll up. If you do have a preference, we really do appreciate that feedback. The meeting recording will also be posted to the Engage page in the next few days. The comment period will be open for 1 month following tonight's meeting, and we have multiple methods for submitting comments: email, phone calls, the Engage page, and letters. Details on all of these options are provided at saskatoon.ca/engage and on the Neighbourhood Bikeways Project. Please feel free to reach out to us if you think of any additional concerns. We encourage you to share the information with your neighbors so that they also have the opportunity to participate. We would also like to get your opinion on how tonight's online meeting went. Please let us know by filling out the online survey, which I will post in the Q&A forum. And if you would like to keep up to date on this project via email, you can also subscribe for updates at the end of that survey. I will just post that in right now. So on behalf of Brian, Brent, Danny, Danae, Natalie, and myself, I would like to thank you all for joining us tonight and for participating in the Neighbourhood Bikeways Project.